if we need up to date, is medical knowledge really knowledge? And remember that at the beginning of the class, I referenced Plato's knowledge is justified true belief. So in order for to be knowledge, I have to believe it and it has to be true. But kind of what we're seeing, what's kind of implied with up to date is that a lot of what we believe as knowledge turns out not to be true. And so in one of the readings that I posted up on Canvas, they referenced Karl Popper's idea of approximate temporary truth. And I think that's really kind of an important idea to keep in mind, and keep that in mind as we're thinking about, well, how, as informatics, how do we manage the fact that knowledge is changing? So if you're thinking about knowledge representation or software, what would be some of the principles that you would think would be really important to have built into your system with this understanding that we're really working with approximate temporary truth? Okay, so what do we mean by flexibility? Let's be more specific. Okay, so software. So in the Buchanan article, he talks about the importance of separating the knowledge, the facts, from the software that would be rendering it, so that you can easily edit the knowledge without having, the last thing you'd want is, and this, if those of you that are programmers that have done like graphical user interfaces or websites, model, view, control, separating out the three components, and so they're all kind of coded and separated easily. Bruce also talked about keeping knowledge in small chunks so that they can be edited together and not overwhelming on looking at it. Another important thing would be version control. So just like that, those Australian guidelines, we saw that we were looking at version 4.0. Any changes to like an ontology, so I've known someone that's worked closely on the gene ontology, previous versions are always present in terms of a version control. Because if you made a decision based on reference to that knowledge that was contained in that ontology, and then that knowledge changes, you have to be able to look back to the resource that justified your decision. So versioning everything is going to be very important in that. Okay, anything else that people want to add? Okay. Share with you a little bit about the book that I'm currently reading. Is called Medical Nihilism. And this is a quote from the publisher, it's Oxford University Press: "A highly controversial argument for a skeptical view about the effectiveness of modern medicine." He's not anti-medicine. What he's saying is the path to medical knowledge is too malleable. Clinical trials, these randomized clinical trials that we believe in so much, are still too malleable to lend them to giving the answers that we want. And it's cut off on the bottom. He's also very concerned about the influence of medicine, influence of money in medicine and in these trials. And there's lots of evidence to be skeptical about something. So here are a couple of things to think about. So this first is a link to a list of withdrawn drugs. And this is worldwide. If we sort this, so this is just going to Wikipedia. So I think almost every country in the world follows basically the same process for adopting a drug. So a drug manufacturer has to demonstrate, safety and efficacy in animals. then moving on to human trials and then these randomized clinical trials. And yet, with this gold standard of determining efficacy of a drug with randomized clinical trials, drugs are still routinely pulled from the market, and they're pulled from the market for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they're just decided that they're not really efficacious, but there's fatal arrhythmias, liver toxicity, sudden cardiac death. These are kind of the bad side that don't necessarily come out in the clinical trials. And so, clinical trials themselves are not the end point of knowledge. And again, informatics is going to be very important in this, because how are you going to find out that there is a increased risk of skin cancers among patients taking this medication? It's going to have to be stuff that's kind of observed in regular practice, and then aggregated. And so this kind of data sharing and being able to access the clinical data of the people taking these drugs. Okay, let me go back to the next one. Oops. Okay, a similar problem with retracted scientific papers. Here's an article in Science about retraction of papers and kind of the causes of kind of this. So sometimes it's just like a mistake was made. So this is this plot right here. You just had a reliability, or you made an error in your calculations. But look how big component to retracted papers is due to fraud. And again, that's an issue of kind of largely money and survivability and prestige. So the scientific methods that we're using to gain information, and there's a case about an anesthesiologist that I think is described in here. This a scientist fraudulent studies put patients at risk. This is a very medically specific article. And so our systems for gaining knowledge are not perfect, and we need ways of monitoring that and revising the knowledge that we're using. So I got one other short thing, and then I'll just we'll go over to the tutorials. But any questions on what we discussed in this set of slides, or comments people would like to make? Okay, let me bring up my. If we surprised at how much fraud is present in the scientific community. If I go back to this, if you look through this, it's largely due to you have some bad actors. So like, I'm going to misstate it, but there's like a small proportion of authors are responsible for a large proportion of the retracted papers. And the publishing, so this is, I was really kind of embarrassed because I'm an electrical engineer by training, that IEEE had this huge spike in retracted, these are conference proceedings. Publishers are getting more aware of the problems, and so they are putting things in place. But there's a lot of I guess a lot of problems things that would lead up to this. So one would be, at least in all the circumstances that I've worked, scientists are competing for a limited supply of funds. And, and especially in the US in medical research, probably 70% of medical researchers have to supply their own salary from grants. The university institutions are not providing them salaries directly. And so they have to get money. You get money from having publications. And so there's this kind of the survival pressure to get papers out that can contribute to things. I think other things, there's just pride is part of it. But these aren't all fraud. I mean, some are withdrawn for reliability. That would be the rush to publish. You know, it's not that you're being fraudulent, but you want to get it out before anyone else. Kind of not really addressed in this article, this science article, but there's a challenge with reproducibility. You know, that's Francis Bacon's, you know, that's the basis of scientific knowledge, that this is reproducible by others. And in theory, medical scientific papers are supposed to provide enough information that it can be replicated by other people reading the articles. And I would say that is almost always false. There is hardly ever enough information provided in an article to reproduce it. And especially in medicine, where the data are rarely shared, or even the code is shared. So trying to get ready for this lecture and the next lecture, I was looking for published models of decision support using mimic data. And I think I found like two articles so far that I could try to adapt to the class. So data, articles are published with data that's not available and code that's not available. And so that becomes a problem for reproducibility and really kind of reliability of what's been published, the knowledge that you're relying on.